Good afternoon. Welcome to the Hard-Headed Sports Podcast. Today we'll actually be doing a broadcast bringing you our 2018 March Madness bracket as I go through some of the games and some of the upsets that I think might happen in the tournament this year. Currently, there are games being played right now. Rhode Island trails Oklahoma at half by 4, and Tennessee is up 10 on Wright State as we were speaking, about to go into half. So all the fun is starting today, and we'll have more games after the 2 o'clock time period. So getting to the total of 10 today and 10 tomorrow, it's the real excitement of March approaching. Getting into it, however, I'm going to start in the south side of the bracket, and I'm going to pick UVA as the number 1 seed, of course. We all know 132 losses for 16 seeds against number 1 seeds, and they've never won a game. While we wait every year to see if it may happen, I don't think it will be happening to Virginia this year. Moving on to the next game, we have the 8-9 matchup between Kansas State and Creighton, and I'm going to pick Kansas State. Being a Texas fan, I've watched the Big 12 a lot, and I have watched Villanova play in the Big East. And watching Creighton play Villanova, I feel like Kansas State's defense matches up well, and their points off turnovers can get something going for them, maybe a run to finish the game against Creighton. I think it's going to be a close game. The 8-9 matchups are always fun because you have equally matched teams. So we'll see who pulls it out. I pick Kansas State, though. Then we have a popular upset pick. The 5-12 is always the greatest upset pick because it usually happens every single year. But we have Kentucky, a young team full of all freshmen in their starting 5, against Davidson, a team who most of us didn't expect to be in the tournament, but they went on a run and defeated Rhode Island in the A10 tournament. So they made it. They've been playing hot of late, so it's a popular upset pick. However, I'm going to go with the pure talent of Kentucky and Calipari's resume in the tournament, and I'm going to pick UK to avoid the upset. Moving on to Arizona versus Buffalo. Arizona is very, very good to be a 4 seed. They should be, in my opinion, around 2, maybe the number 1 overall 3 seed. So I question it a lot why they are a 4 seed, but I know that rating just makes it a harder bracket for Virginia. So I am going to pick Arizona here, and I feel like Arizona can make a lot of music in the tournament as a 4 seed, given the opponents they have to play. Next up is another popular upset pick. Loyola Chicago is playing Miami, and when you look at Loyola Chicago, it's a mid-major school, so most people are like, who are they? It's their first time in the tournament in over 30 years. But they actually did play a non-conference game against Florida this year at Florida and beat them. Florida is a 6 seed, and I'm going to actually buy into the upset, and Loyola Chicago, I think, is going to beat Miami in the first round. Moving on to Tennessee and Wright State, the game we currently have right now. I picked Tennessee from the beginning, and they're winning by 10 at half. I don't want that to seem like, oh, I'm picking them now because they're winning. But I believe in Rick Barnes, former Texas coach down in Tennessee, has really turned the program around this year, and I think that they're going to be able to move on. Now, getting into Texas, the next game you see is Nevada versus Texas. My Longhorns made the tournament, which I'm very, very happy about. And I think they actually got a very good matchup for them in Nevada. Nevada is a very good team. Don't let the conference sort of disguise that, but they are very small. And with Mo Bamba back and healthy, Texas has 3 players over 6'10" that they can possibly start. And Nevada has no player in their starting lineup over 6'7". So while Nevada is quick and they can score, their offense being top 10 rated, Texas is tall and long, and their defense is top 10 rated. On the other hand, Nevada is in the bottom part of the ratings in the country for their defensive efficiency, and Texas is on the bottom part of the rankings in the country for their offensive efficiency. So we're going to be seeing good offense versus good defense, and bad offense versus bad defense. And also in the height, tall against short. So it's going to be an interesting game. No bias here. I actually do believe Texas will win this game. and I think it will be important but very, very close win for them as well. Moving down to Cincinnati and Georgia State to complete the first round of the South bracket. Georgia State, many of you remember R.J. Hunter and his father's heroics in the 2014 tournament against Baylor, where his dad fell off the stool while coaching as his son hit a three-pointer with 2 seconds left to take a lead versus Baylor and eventually upset them. However, Cincinnati can really, really defend, and they beat a good Wichita State team in their conference tournament to sort of prove that they belong where they are and earn that 2 seed. So I'm going to pick Cincinnati here. So there you have it. We're on to our round of 32, and we have some interesting matchups. First, starting at the top with UVA and Kansas State, I'm still going to take Virginia. Virginia is one of the most balanced teams I've ever seen in college basketball. Their offensive efficiency is above the charts, and their defensive efficiency is in the top 5, limiting their opponents under 70 points basically every single game. So when you look at it, they did lose their 6th man, DeAndre Hunter, which is a big loss for them. But I think their talent and their system alone, plus the coaching of Tony Bennett, will allow them to push pretty far in the tournament and get this win over Kansas State. Next, we have one of the better matchups, I think, in this bracket, and it's Kentucky versus Arizona, because they are 2 of the most talented rosters in the country. Kentucky sporting 5 freshmen, however, they're all highly recruited freshmen, as always with Kentucky. And then Arizona with DeAndre Ayton, amid all the scandals between getting paid and Sean Miller, has still found a way to produce, averaging over 30 points and 18 rebounds in the Pac-12 tournament. Put that together with Alonzo Trier, the returning guard, who had some experience in the tournament last year, and I think Arizona will pull this one out. It makes for an interesting Sweet 16 between Virginia and Arizona. Moving down, we have Loyola Chicago versus Tennessee, and I'm going to buy into Loyola Chicago again, because every year there seems to be a team that moves pretty far into the tournament, and I think Loyola Chicago has the resume and the talent to do it. So I think they're going to beat a Tennessee team that might just have an off game after being challenged by Wright State the first round. Then lastly, we're going to go to Texas and Cincinnati, and a little bias might turn in if I think it may be an upset, because I think it is a possibility. With Texas, if they're able to shoot the ball, they'll be able to beat a good Cincinnati team. But I am going to pick Cincinnati here because Cincinnati can really defend, and a good defense against sort of bad offense never equals a good matchup. So we'll see, but Cincinnati, Loyola Chicago, Arizona, and Virginia are moving on for me. Loyola Chicago being the surprise there. So into the Elite Eight. We are going to get our representative for the conference, the bracket in the South, and I think that the loss of DeAndre Hunter will allow Arizona to play their style of game when Virginia has to sub. And the loss of the 6th man, someone who can come on, score, and play defense against any player in the opposing team's lineup, is something very versatile and helpful for the Cavaliers roster, and I think Arizona will be able to take advantage of him not being there. Moving down to the bottom, the Cinderella run for Loyola Chicago I think ends here, as Cincinnati is just too good defensively, and I think we're going to have a good matchup between Arizona and Cincinnati in the Elite Eight. When it gets to it, over here, Arizona versus Cincinnati in the Elite Eight, I believe that Arizona is going to pull out a win against a good defense, and Sean Miller, amongst all the scandals this season, will get his first Final Four appearance and possibly a national championship after all is said and done. So that is our South bracket. I'm pretty confident in it. Loyola Chicago, you have a bit of a Cinderella run here, and I don't think it's going to be the last one in the bracket either. So moving on to the West, we'll get to see possibly some more of it. We have Xavier versus Texas South. Texas South is actually one of the first teams to have a losing record in the tournament. They won their conference tournament, went on a run, but they are 16-19 overall. And Xavier has height and length in their guard play with Trayvon Blewett. And Texas South's point guard is actually just 5'7". So I think while Xavier isn't the strongest of number one seeds, I think that they'll be able to pull this one out because, again, the 116 matchup will just be too much for Texas Southern to handle. Moving down, we have another 8-9 matchup, and that's another interesting matchup between Missouri and Florida State. But Missouri just actually got Michael Porter Jr. back, and he's considered to be top 10 NBA talent. He didn't play too well in the SEC tournament, but hopefully he can shake the rust off and put on a good tournament that we can enjoy. And I think that will be enough. And I also think Missouri just overall has played better this year than Florida State. So I think they'll be able to win a close game in another good 8-9 matchup. Down here, we have OSU versus San Diego State. South Dakota State. And when you look at it, it's quite difficult for a team that hasn't played in about 3 weeks to come and shake the rust off immediately. And Ohio State, after being eliminated in the Big Ten tournament, which was actually a week earlier than most of the Power 5 conference tournaments, lost pretty early in the tournament. And they haven't played in a while. And I think that the big man on South Dakota State, Dom, will be able to give a boost to South Dakota State, and they will be able to upset Ohio State in a 12-5 matchup that we all love seeing the upsets in. They'll be able to move on and face the winner of Gonzaga and UNCG. And Gonzaga lost 4 starters from last year's national title game run, but they are well disciplined and they play a good brand of basketball. They handle whatever you throw at them, and I think they'll be able to move on as a number 4 seed. Houston versus San Diego State presents one of the good matchups that people really aren't talking about, as Houston did a good job in their conference tournament, but San Diego State had a late upset over Nevada in theirs. So this is an interesting 6-11 matchup. I'm just going with talent alone and a better resume, and Houston, I think, will be able to pull out a game that people might not realize how close it's going to be. Moving down, we have Michigan versus Montana. And what I said before about Ohio State is that it's difficult to shake the rust off very quickly after not playing for a while. And Michigan has not played for a while, but if you remember, before they got the week break after the conference tournament, they won the Big Ten tournament when they weren't supposed to, and it allowed them to move up possibly 2, maybe another seed, and move from a 5 or a 4 to a 3 in this bracket. They beat teams with the likes of Michigan State and Purdue, and I think that Michigan is very well coached and have a lot of talent in their bigs and will be able to beat a Montana team that most people don't see much of in the tournament. Moving down, a 10-7 matchup, which I'm really intrigued to see. Texas A&M started off the year very well, sort of hit a skid, but finished strong, allowing them to make the tournament, versus Providence, who was probably on the bubble a little bit, but then had a huge win over Xavier in the Big East tournament. And I think that Providence will ride that high for a little bit after their upset and beat Texas A&M as the 10 seed, beating a 7 seed. Then moving down, we have Lipscomb versus UNC. And I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. UNC is very, very talented, very well coached. And Joel Berry is one of the best players we'll see in the tournament. If he can shoot, and he can shoot well in the tournament, UNC will be very dangerous in the long run. Moving on, we're going to see some of our Sweet 16 teams. We have Xavier beating Missouri in this game, and I think it's going to be very, very close. But Michael Porter Jr. has not played well enough for a long amount of time, and I think Xavier will be able to take advantage of that with their guard length and just having a successful season alone playing teams like Villanova. I think they'll be able to come out and play just a better overall game, even though it will be a close game. Then moving on, we have Gonzaga versus South Dakota State University. And Gonzaga, I feel like, is going to end this Cinderella run very early because Gonzaga is very well coached by Mark Few and just, again, very well disciplined. So they can score the ball, they can play defense, and I think that's a team that's very disciplined and very well coached and just all around very good at what they do is what can stop a Cinderella like that, because they won't make very many mistakes and it won't be something that the Cinderella can take advantage of. So unfortunately, South Dakota State's run ends here, but Gonzaga will move on. Going down, we have another interesting matchup in Houston and Michigan. I think this one's pretty easy though, because Michigan has been playing very well as of late, and I think they'll be able to continue that trend and beat Houston. And then a game that I think a lot of people don't see as being very close is a 10-2 matchup between Providence and UNC. Personally, the 1-9 matchups and the 10-2 matchups are the ones that interest me the most. The 7-2 matchups as well, as I try to pick one of those in every bracket. But Providence is playing really well. UNC has had games where they have lost track of what they really want to do and haven't played very well, so I think it will be a closer game than most people will expect. However, I do think UNC will pull it out. So moving on, we have Xavier, Gonzaga, Michigan, and UNC as our teams left in the West bracket. And I think this is where one of the big shakeups comes, as Gonzaga, I believe, will beat Xavier. Xavier is not the strongest one seed in the tournament, and Gonzaga is one of the stronger teams that we've seen consistently in the tournament over years past. And I think their experience alone will help them defeat a Xavier team that got pretty far in the tournament last year but won't be able to do the same this year. Moving down, we have possibly one of the better matchups in the tournament in Michigan-UNC, a team that is playing really well, has a history in the tournament, and UNC, who of course is UNC, and has always played well, is always at the top of the rankings, and Roy Williams coaches his players very, very well. So this game, I think, is going to be one of the games of the tournament, as it'll be a very close one. Probably a late shot or some clutch free throws, or maybe even a bad turnover from one side will win them the game. And I think that Roy Williams' team will be able to pull it out and move on to face Gonzaga in the Elite Eight. That saying, we'll get our representative from the West bracket, and I think this is another good matchup, as the West offered some very good matchups for consistency through seeds 1 through 5, and I think that UNC will be able to beat Gonzaga and move to the Final Four again after their national title run last year. Moving over, we have the East bracket, as we have Villanova, who's one of the stronger number 1 seeds, playing Radford, who just had a good win over LIU Brooklyn in the first 4. Of course, I'm going with Villanova here because the 1-16 is such a bad matchup, and Villanova is probably top 5 teams with everything. They're balanced, they have talent, they can defend, and they can score, and they do it better than most anyone in the tournament. So I think Nova will go on a long run in this tournament, and they'll be able to handle Radford easily. Next is one of the matchups I want you to circle, is Virginia Tech versus Alabama. And Alabama was on the bubble, had high expectations coming into the season with Colin Sexton choosing to go there and possibly being a top 5 pick in the draft. And his heroics in the SEC tournament against Texas Tech, and then in the upset over Auburn, got them into the tournament as a 9 seed. But Virginia Tech has beaten Duke, Virginia, and they have also beaten North Carolina State, as well as North Carolina. So these 4 games show that Virginia Tech can play with the best, and all those teams I just listed are high seeds in the tournament. So I think a tired Alabama team who had to play in 3 straight games and play grueling games will be a popular upset pick, but will not be able to pull it off against Virginia Tech. Moving down, we have a popular upset pick again with West Virginia against Murray State. West Virginia started off the season very hot and hit a bit of a skid lately, but they pulled it together. They made the tournament. Javon Carter is one of the best players in the tournament. I think that he is the difference maker for the East bracket, because if he can play and play well, they might be able to knock off a high seed. But I think they'll move on against Murray State. Murray State can handle the ball well, and West Virginia's best attribute is their press, turning the ball over. So I would think it'll be close, but I think that the experience and the heroics of Javon Carter might win them this game. Then we have Wichita State and Marshall, and I'm a huge fan of what Wichita State does because they are always here. Somehow they've gone through a bad conference and made it, and we've questioned them every year about it, but then they moved into the AAC this year and competed with Cincinnati, proving that they deserve to be recognized as one of the best programs in the country. And they have very athletic guards who can defend and attack the rim, and I think that they'll beat Marshall pretty soundly in the first round. Moving down, we have Florida versus St. Bonaventure. I think this is a very, very interesting game. I think if UCLA played better against St. Bonaventure in the first four and they were in this game, it would be a popular upset, one that I would pick to have UCLA moving on. But the point guard from Florida returns, and Florida has been here before and will be able to beat St. Bonaventure, even though St. Bonaventure can play well and win without shooting the ball very well, as we saw in the first four. But the experience overall from Florida, I think, will move them on, and I think they'll defeat St. Bonaventure pretty easily. Next, everyone loves Stephen F. Austin. They're always a Cinderella pick, but Texas Tech, I've seen play firsthand, and they are the most athletic team in this tournament. They lost a few games later in the season because Keenan Evans got hurt, their point guard and their leading scorer, but he is back healthier than ever, and they are playing good basketball. They lost to West Virginia in the Big 12 tournament, and we might see a possible rematch in here, but I think that they'll be able to compete with anyone they play just based on their athleticism. Moving down, another upset pick for me, I have Butler beating Arkansas. Arkansas is a good team, and many think they'll win this game, but Butler has experience. Butler is always here. They're always put in that little Cinderella 10-11 seed range and can always work with it. They play good basketball, and they have two primary scoring options. They don't really find a third, but if they're on, they are hot and they can score. And I think they'll be able to beat Arkansas. Then moving down, we have Purdue, which Purdue made a case to be a number one seed over Xavier. They have Isaac Haas, who is a huge forward, and surrounded him with four shooters, which is seemingly unfair. Carson Edwards can really, really shoot the ball. So Purdue is going to have the ingredients necessary to move on in the first round. Going back to the top of the bracket, Nova versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech has knocked off some big names in college basketball, and I think they're going to give Villanova a run for their money. But Jalen Brunson is too good and will be able to calm Nova down and sort of seemingly end the game on a run, or be able to control Virginia Tech, trying to compete with them for an upset bid. Moving down, we have Wichita State versus West Virginia in one of the more interesting games that I think we'll have, because West Virginia loves to press, turn the ball over, and Wichita State has proven time and time again that they can play fundamental offense. And I think that West Virginia and Javon Carter may be able to force a bit too many turnovers for Wichita State to handle and win this game in a very, very close scoring contest. Down, we have Florida versus Texas Tech. I talked about Texas Tech's athleticism, and I also talked about how I thought UCLA might have been able to upset Florida. So I'm going with Texas Tech here solely on their athleticism and Keenan Evans' ability to score the basketball. He'll move on past Florida with his team, and they'll be in contention for a Final Four bid. Moving down even further, we have Butler versus Purdue, and I've talked about it before. Butler 10, 11 seeds, Cinderella runs, and I like the 10-2 matchups we get. Purdue is very good, but they have shown games where they cannot make their shots. And on a team that relies on making shots and their center getting offensive rebounds on those missed shots, I think Butler's defense and their scoring might be able to get them to upset Purdue. So I'm picking Butler to upset Purdue, which is actually a very big upset, as many people have Purdue in their Final Four. Moving on, we'll get our Elite Eight teams, and we have Nova versus West Virginia, which I think is, again, one of the most interesting games of this tournament, because Nova has good guard play in Jalen Brunson and Dante DiVincenzo, and West Virginia, I've talked about in the whole episode, Javon Carter can really defend. So Javon Carter, I think, will be able to defend Jalen Brunson, and West Virginia will upset Villanova and move on to the Elite Eight. Then, moving down, Texas Tech versus Butler. This is a very good matchup, as I've talked highly about both teams, but I think Texas Tech's athleticism will be able to move them past Butler and end their Cinderella run, and we'll get a Big 12 Elite Eight. And then, for the Final Four representative from the East bracket, they matched up in the Big 12 tournament, and West Virginia beat them, but I feel that Texas Tech's athleticism will allow them to move in to the Final Four and represent the East. So welcome back from a quick break. We're going to move into the Midwest bracket now, and we're going to see our last Final Four team, and then we'll be able to break down the Final Four and the National Championship for you guys. And let's get right started into Kansas versus UPenn. And I've talked a little bit about the 116 upsets and how they never happen. And this game is a game to watch, because UPenn defends the three very well, allowing their opponents 29% from behind the arc. And Kansas somewat lives or dies by the three. While they shoot the three very well, and Devontae Graham, the Big 12 Player of the Year, can shoot, if Penn is able to limit their threes and score the ball offensively, I think it might be one of the first 16-1 upsets you see. But for the sake of picking it, I'm going with Kansas, because Kansas just has so much more talent than the Ivy League team in the University of Pennsylvania. Now moving down, we have another 8-9 matchup, the matchups that are very closely contested, and my pick is actually the 9 in this situation in NC State, because NC State has a lot of athleticism and they defend very well. I think it'll be a very close game, as Seton Hall from the Big East is a good team, but I think NC State will be able to pull it out and move on to face Kansas. Now we have a popular upset pick with New Mexico State and Clemson. Clemson, who's never really been relevant in basketball, was able to put on a good run in the ACC this year, and New Mexico State is one of the big sleeper teams in this tournament. I'm actually going to buy into the Cinderella and take New Mexico State, because I think that they'll be able to turn Clemson over and score a lot. So I think they'll be able to outscore Clemson and end up winning this game, probably by a bigger margin than many people think. Moving down, we have Charleston and Auburn. Auburn has not played well as of late. They lost a player to injury, and it's proven to be a very big loss. They're 2-4 in their last 6 games and lost to Alabama in the SEC tournament. But I do think they'll beat Charleston. I think talent alone will allow them to move past them and face what could be another Cinderella run in New Mexico State this year. Moving down, another interesting game, as Syracuse beat Arizona State the other night for the first 4, getting them in to face TCU. TCU does not really have an identity on offense. They sort of just rely on who's ever scoring well that day. But I think TCU will be able to effectively score against the 2-3 zone that Jim Boeheim is very, very well known for running and giving teams fits with. But I think they'll be able to do something with it and score in a close game, as Syracuse returns to the tournament and tries to put in another Cinderella run. Moving down, Michigan State versus Bucknell. Michigan State, this team is not the team that Tom Izzo usually has. he usually has good players who hustle well and who can play with grit and make key plays in key moments. Not just talent alone, but this year he has 2 forwards that both will probably go in the lottery, if not the top 15, in Jaren Jackson and Miles Bridges. And I think that the coaching from Tom Izzo will allow them to move on, as I trust Tom Izzo a lot, almost with my life, when he plays in March to win a game. Now we have Rhode Island versus Oklahoma, which is actually going on as we speak, with Rhode Island up 6 right now over Oklahoma. They are a small team led by Danny Hurley. They're very quick. They're very athletic for their size. But then Oklahoma, of course, led by freshman phenom Trae Young, who seemingly can hit a shot from 40 feet out consistently, and the size and length of Oklahoma. So again, like we talked about with Nevada and Texas, the length is completely matched up differently, and it may tilt the scale one way or another depending on who can play better. And I think the coaching from Danny Hurley at Rhode Island will allow them to beat Oklahoma, as Oklahoma does not prove to the viewers that they deserve to be in the tournament after making it in on a questionable decision by the committee. Then we move down to Duke and Iona. I'm from New York, Westchester County, so Iona is right next to me, and I've always been a fan of when they make the tournament. They usually don't do too well in the tournament, and they're playing a Duke team that has probably the best roster in the tournament in Marvin Bagley, Wendell Carter Jr., and of course Grayson Allen. Not a huge fan of Grayson Allen, but Duke is a good team, and they will be able to beat Iona as much as I don't want them to. Moving on to the round of 32, we have NC State versus Kansas. And Kansas, I think, will come off a harder game than most people expect against Penn. And they won't be able to make the 3 as much as they want to against NC State, similar to Penn. NC State also defends the 3 very well, allowing about 33% of their opponents shooting behind the arc. And this is one of the bigger upsets I have in the tournament, as NC State, I think, beats Kansas in the Midwest bracket to move on. I also don't like Kansas very much, being a Texas fan, but I sincerely believe that NC State will be able to limit their 3s and score in the paint against a Kansas team who does not do much in the paint as a team. Next, we have Auburn versus New Mexico State. New Mexico State, I'm a huge fan of in this tournament, and Auburn, like I told you before, has lost 4 of their last 6 and is not playing the best brand of basketball. And I think we're going to have our upset matchup of the tournament in New Mexico State playing NC State at 12 versus a 9 in the Sweet 16. Similar to what we saw South Carolina do last year as a 7 seed move on pretty deep into the tournament. Next, we have TCU versus Michigan State. And I talked about how TCU really doesn't have an identity or a leading scoring option. And then Michigan State being led by 2 forwards in probably the top 20 of the NBA draft this coming year. Michigan State, I think this is going to be an easy win, and they'll be able to move on into the Sweet 16. Then going down, we have Rhode Island versus Duke. Rhode Island, again, is a good team. I'm a fan of them. I love Danny Hurley and what he does, but Duke is just too good. I hate saying that, but I usually end up saying that every year. And Duke will be able to move on in a very good matchup, which we saw at the beginning of the year between Duke and Michigan State when Grayson Allen had 36 points. So first, we're going to do our Cinderella in the Midwest side of the bracket, and we have NC State and New Mexico State. And just on talent alone, I think this is the sort of game that will allow NC State to sort of solidify their Cinderella run and move on and play very well against a New Mexico State team that's going to be very tired. They're playing 2 very good opponents, and they're going to have to work hard to upset both of them. And I think they're going to come into this game against NC State, and the talent of NC State will just be able to overpower them. It was a good run for them, an exciting run, but NC State will be moving on to the Elite 8. Then down here, I love this matchup. I talked about it just before and how they played, and Duke won earlier in the year. Grayson Allen had 36 points, but Grayson Allen, ever since that game, hasn't really had a game like that. And I think if there's anyone who's going to be able to stop Wendell Carter Jr. and Marvin Bagley, it's Jaren Jackson Jr. and Miles Bridges. Miles Bridges can guard Marvin Bagley with his size, but then also take him out onto the wing, and he can score from the perimeter better than he can. And I think Bridges is going to be the difference in this game, as we have two legendary coaches and two very talented rosters going up against each other. But Michigan State, I believe, will win and move on to face NC State. And for our Final Four represented from the Midwest bracket, I think Michigan State, first off, underrated as a 3 seed, probably could have been a 2 seed, but I think they'll be able to, again, similar to what happened with New Mexico State, take advantage of a team that is tired from playing their hardest every single game of this tournament against good opponents, and I think the talent of Michigan State will just be able to overpower NC State. So bringing it over here, we have our South representative in Arizona. We have our West representative in UNC. We have our East representative in Texas Tech, which I don't think a lot of people are expecting. And then we have our Midwest representative in Michigan State. Number one takeaway from these teams in the Final Four. I think it's very important to point out. Arizona, while they seemingly have been rated very high and seeded very high in the tournament, in most recent years, Sean Miller has never made it to a Final Four. So this will be his first trip to a Final Four down in San Antonio. They'll be playing UNC, who, coming off a national title run last year, has Roy Williams, who has coached in the Final Four and national championship games over and over in his career. And then we'll move to Texas Tech, and we'll have Texas Tech, who will make its first Final Four trip in a while, and not really one that people expect. And then we have them facing Michigan State and Tom Izzo, who again has been there before and has coached in the Final Four and national championship games before. So that alone, I think, will sort of show what is going to happen with the Final Four, as I think Texas Tech being super athletic, Michigan State has athleticism of their own and just a better roster, and I think Michigan State will be able to win against Texas Tech. And then I think this game might be one of the better games of the tournament, because Arizona, while they haven't been here before, they are very talented. And they have DeAndre Ayton, who should be the number one pick in the NBA draft. And if he isn't, NBA GMs are doing something wrong. He's averaging 30 points and 18 rebounds in his last 3 games. So you have a talented roster, but I think the experience with Roy Williams and Joel Berry and the entire UNC roster will allow them to beat Arizona. And we will have our national championship game being UNC from the West versus Michigan State. Two storied franchises, two very, very talented rosters with NBA picks on their team. And it's going to be a tough game, but I think that the outside shooting of UNC won't be able to match up against Michigan State's size inside. And I think your overall champion this year will be Tom Izzo and the Michigan State Spartans. So this is the bracket rundown. I'm sure most of you disagree with me on certain picks. That's all right. We'll see at the end whose bracket is better. Just remember to call Warren Buffett for me if this one's perfect. But I hope it's a good March Madness. It's the most exciting time in college basketball, and it's around my birthday, so I'm excited. But when it comes down to it, we'll see a lot of upsets. We'll see some good teams with some good programs, and eventually, I believe we'll see Michigan State winning the whole thing. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today, and make sure you like us on Facebook, comment, ask us questions, and also respond to us on YouTube. And also, please remember to help us with the Carson Long GoFundMe page. Tell your friends, possibly donate. It'll help a lot. Thank you.